Claire Ashford didn't even look up from her phone when Ethan Mercer walked through the glass doors of Titan Shield Technologies. She just snapped her fingers, twice, like he was a dog, and said to her assistant, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear, "Get security. There's some guy in a flannel shirt walking around like he owns the place." She finally glanced over, top to bottom, the way people do when they've already made up their mind. Who let a handyman in through the front entrance? Marcus Steele, her security director, was already moving. He grabbed Ethan's arm before the man could say a single word. If you've ever been dismissed before you even opened your mouth, judged by the shoes on your feet or the truck you drove in, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end of this story. Drop your city and country in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. And if you haven't liked this video yet, do it now, because the story you're about to hear is only getting started, and it doesn't go where you think it does. The morning had started badly, and Ethan Mercer was used to that. He'd overslept by 11 minutes because his daughter Sophie had climbed into his bed sometime around 3 in the morning, complaining that her room was too quiet. She was 7, and she'd developed a theory that silence was the sound monsters made right before they decided to do something. Ethan had explained patiently that monsters weren't real. Sophie had explained with equal patience that he couldn't actually prove that. They had reached a compromise where she slept with the small fan running, pointed at the wall, and he lay on the very edge of his own mattress with approximately 4 inches of personal space. By 6:15 he was up, making oatmeal he didn't want, listening to the morning news he wasn't really hearing, and trying to remember where he'd put the badge case the night before. Sophie shuffled in at 6:40 in her dinosaur pajamas, hair in every direction, and announced that she wanted eggs. "I already made oatmeal," Ethan said. "I know," she said. "I still want eggs." He made her eggs. He was going to be late regardless, and she was the one thing in his life he had never once regretted being late for. His neighbor, Mrs. Paula, came over at 7:15 to watch Sophie until the school bus arrived. She was 63, had strong opinions about processed cheese and local politics, and was the closest thing Ethan had to a reliable support system in the city. She handed him a travel mug of coffee he hadn't asked for and told him he looked tired. "I'm fine," he said. "You look tired," she repeated, like he hadn't spoken. He took the coffee. He was tired. He drove his 12-year-old pickup truck through 40 minutes of morning traffic and arrived at Titan Shield Technologies 11 minutes behind schedule, which was not a disaster, but it was not the entrance he'd wanted to make either. The building itself was the kind of architecture that cost a lot of money to make look like it wasn't trying. All glass and pale concrete angles, a massive corporate logo above the entrance done in brushed steel letters, manicured hedges that were probably maintained by a full-time landscaper. There were cameras at every corner of the exterior. Ethan noticed that automatically. Noticed the coverage angles, the blind spots, where the housings were old enough that the firmware was probably outdated. It was just how his brain worked. He'd spent enough years learning to look at safety infrastructure the way a doctor looked at vitals, quietly, constantly, reading things other people walked right past. He parked in the visitor space, gathered his bag, a battered canvas thing that Sophie had drawn a small stegosaurus on in permanent marker, and walked toward the main entrance. He was wearing dark slacks, clean but not pressed, and a blue flannel shirt. He owned better clothes. He'd considered wearing them this morning and then decided against it, the way he usually did. The work was the work. What he wore while he did it had never seemed like anyone's legitimate business. He should have anticipated that other people would disagree. The lobby was enormous and deliberately impressive, a high ceiling with exposed structural beams done in the same brushed steel as the logo outside, a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single block of white stone, and clusters of chairs that probably cost more each than Ethan's monthly car payment. There were employees moving through in groups of 2 and 3, most of them young, most of them in the particular kind of business casual that announced corporate ambition without quite committing to formality. Everyone wore a badge on a lanyard. The badges were color-coded. Ethan noticed that too. He walked toward the reception desk. He had barely made it 10 feet past the entrance when he heard the snap. Not a word. A snap. 2 of them, sharp and deliberate, like someone calling for a waiter. He stopped and turned. She was standing near the elevator bank, Mid-40s, tailored ivory blazer, dark hair pulled back, with the kind of precision that takes either a very good stylist or a very controlling personality. She was looking at her phone with the practiced inattention of someone who had learned that ignoring people was its own form of power. The phone came down slowly. Her eyes moved across him with the kind of clinical disinterest usually reserved for things that aren't worth the energy of actual disdain. "Who let a handyman in through the front entrance?" she said. She wasn't talking to Ethan. She was talking to the room in general, to her assistant, to the security desk, to anyone within earshot. It was the particular type of public comment designed to humiliate without technically being an insult, because she was describing, not accusing, just observing, just wondering aloud. Ethan recognized the move. He'd seen it before. "Ms. Ashford," he said, and his voice was even. "My name is Ethan Mercer. I'm the independent safety inspector assigned to your pre-contract audit. I have an appointment with your compliance officer at 9. The words landed and then seemed to evaporate without effect. Claire Ashford blinked. Once. Then something that wasn't quite a smile moved across her mouth. "An inspector," she said. "From which agency?" "I'm contracted independently through the City Safety Standards Office. The documentation was sent to your legal team 2 weeks ago." She finally looked at him directly. Not with reconsidering, with confirmation. Like he'd said something that settled the matter in a way she'd already suspected. "Well," she said, "we have inspectors scheduled. Our office clears those arrangements in advance through our security director." She glanced sideways. "Marcus." Marcus Steele materialized the way security directors in expensive buildings tended to materialize, as though he'd been nearby the whole time, waiting for exactly this. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of professionally maintained calm that sat just above controlled aggression. He wore a dark suit and an earpiece he probably didn't need because it communicated authority. His badge was black. Ethan noticed it was the only black one in the lobby. "This gentleman claims he has an appointment," Claire said, in a tone that made claims into something to be managed rather than verified. Marcus looked at Ethan the way people look at a car that's parked somewhere it probably shouldn't be. "Can I see some ID?" "Of course," Ethan said. He opened the badge case, the leather one with the city seal embossed on the front, the credentials issued under the Safety Infrastructure Compliance Act, the laminated authorization card signed by the city manager's office. He held it out. Marcus took it, looked at it, looked at Ethan. "This says independent contractor," he said. "That's correct?" "We weren't notified of an independent inspection." "Your legal team was notified on the 14th, Ethan said. "I can provide the confirmation number if that's helpful." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not doubt. Calculation. "Our legal team has no record of this," he said. "I'd need to verify before allowing anyone access to our facilities." "That's completely reasonable," Ethan said. "I'm happy to wait while you verify." It should have ended there. It was a straightforward situation, a paperwork question, easily resolved. Someone would make a call, check the system, confirm the authorization, and they would move on. Ethan had done this before. At other facilities, in other lobbies, with other security directors who'd made the same face Marcus was making now. It was almost always resolved in under 5 minutes. But Claire Ashford was still standing there, phone back in her hand now, and she said, almost idly, the way you might mention the weather, "Marcus, just call the police. This is private property, and he wasn't on the approved visitor list." Ethan looked at her. "Ms. Ashford, there's no need to—" "We don't know who you are," she said, and there was no heat in it, which was somehow worse. Cold dismissal is its own particular thing. Anyone can print a card. Anyone can walk into a lobby and claim to have an appointment. We have sensitive equipment here and a contract process that requires discretion. I'm not going to allow an unverified stranger access to this building simply because he shows up with a laminated card and a story." "Then verify," Ethan said. "That's all I'm asking. Make the call. Call the City Safety Standards Office. Call the city manager. The number is on the authorization card you're holding." Marcus had already taken out his own phone. For a moment, Ethan thought he was actually going to do it. Make the sensible call, confirm the appointment, move forward like a professional. Instead, Marcus called the police. The 2 officers arrived in 6 minutes. They were young, early 30s at most, and they came in with the practiced ease of people responding to a low-grade situation. One of them, a woman with her hair in a tight bun, assessed the lobby quickly before her eyes landed on Ethan. The other, a younger man, went straight to Marcus. "Got a call about an unauthorized individual," the younger officer said. "That's him," Marcus said, nodding toward Ethan. "He came in claiming to be an inspector. No verified appointment, no clearance." Ethan spoke calmly. "Officers, I'm an independent safety inspector contracted by the City Safety Standards Office. I have credentials and a confirmation number. I was asking to have my appointment verified before they called you." The female officer, her badge said Rodriguez, looked at the credentials Marcus was still holding. "Can I see those?" Marcus handed them over, slightly reluctantly. Rodriguez read through them. Her expression shifted in a way that was small but noticeable. "Sir," she said, looking at Ethan with something recalibrating behind her eyes, "can you give me your confirmation number?" Ethan recited it from memory. Rodriguez stepped away and got on her radio. Her partner held position near the door. The lobby had gone very quiet. Several employees who'd been passing through had stopped entirely, watching from a careful distance with the particular expression people wear when they're witnessing something they're going to discuss for weeks afterward. Claire stood near the elevators, arms lightly crossed, expression composed. She didn't look worried. She looked mildly inconvenienced, the way you look when a package takes longer to arrive than expected. The radio exchange. Ethan couldn't fully hear took about 90 seconds. Then Rodriguez came back, and something about the way she walked back was already different. She handed the credentials to Ethan, not to Marcus. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'm going to ask you to bear with us for just a few more minutes. I've reached the dispatch supervisor, and there's someone who wants to speak to this situation directly." "Of course," Ethan said. Marcus frowned. "What does that mean?" Rodriguez looked at him evenly. "It means someone's coming." Commissioner Daniel Hargrove was not supposed to be in that part of the city on a Thursday morning. He had a briefing at 11 and a budget meeting that afternoon that he'd been trying to mentally brace for since Tuesday. When the call came through from dispatch, flagged priority, which was the word Rodriguez's supervisor had used, he had been in his car 3 blocks away running through agenda notes. He pulled up to Titan Shield Technologies 8 minutes later. The lobby turned to look when he walked in. That was partly the uniform. Commissioner rank, full dress, not a man who showed up to routine calls. And partly just the way Hargrove moved, which was the particular unhurried confidence of someone who had spent decades making rooms adjust themselves to him rather than the other way around. His eyes found Ethan Mercer immediately. And then Daniel Hargrove, police commissioner of the city, stopped walking, squared his shoulders, and saluted him. Not a casual nod. Not a collegial gesture. A full, proper salute. The kind that meant something to the people in the room who understood what it meant, and something else entirely to the people who didn't. The lobby went absolutely silent. "Ethan," Hargrove said, and his voice carried without being raised. "I'm sorry for the delay." Ethan nodded once. "Commissioner." Claire Ashford's arms had unfolded. Her phone was at her side. For the first time since Ethan had walked through the door, something was moving behind her expression that wasn't cold composure or casual authority. It was something closer to the feeling you get when the floor shifts under you, and you're not sure how far it's going to go. Marcus Steele had gone very still. Hargrove looked around the lobby with the unhurried patience of a man who had all the time in the world and knew it. "Would someone like to explain to me," he said pleasantly, "why an inspector authorized under the City Safety Standards Act with full credentials and a confirmed appointment was almost removed from this building by police?" Nobody answered. "Ms. Ashford," Hargrove said. Claire's voice came out slightly smaller than her usual register. "We had a protocol concern. Unverified credentials." "The credentials are verified," Hargrove said. "They've been verified for 11 years. He paused, letting that land. "Mr. Mercer has worked safety compliance in this city since before most of your engineers graduated. He's identified 4 structural failures that would have resulted in mass casualty events. He is not a handyman." The way he said the last word made it clear that someone's comment had made it into the radio chain. Rodriguez was looking at a point on the far wall. Her partner had found something very interesting to examine on his shoe. Claire's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I wasn't aware of his full background." "No," Hargrove agreed. "You clearly weren't." He turned to Ethan. "You good?" "I'm good," Ethan said. "Then let's let you get to work." Claire led Ethan to the compliance office herself. She didn't apologize. He hadn't expected her to, and the absence of it told him more than an apology would have. An apology can be strategic. Silence is usually honest. The compliance office was on the third floor, a mid-sized room with too many monitors and the particular organized chaos of a team that had been working at high volume for a while. 3 people looked up when he walked in. One of them, a woman in her early 30s with dark circles under her eyes, and a coffee mug that said nothing on it at all, made the smallest movement, like she'd been holding something in and had just recognized that the person who might be able to receive it had finally arrived. Her name badge said O. Carter. Ethan filed that away. Claire gave a brief, clipped introduction to the compliance team, told them to give Ethan whatever he needed, and left without looking at him again. The door closed behind her. Ethan set his bag down on the table, Stegosaurus side up, and looked around the room. "Okay," he said. "Who wants to start?" The 2 other compliance staff exchanged a look. O. Carter, Olivia, he'd find out in a minute, looked at him with something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite fear. It was the particular expression of someone who had been carrying something alone for too long and wasn't yet sure whether handing it off was a rescue or a risk. "We have the standard documentation package ready," she said. Her voice was careful, professional. "Floor plans, fire suppression specs, exit load calculations, emergency system schematics." "Good," Ethan said. He pulled out his own folders, physical copies, old habit, and a yellow notepad he'd been using since before the building was constructed. "Let's start with the emergency system architecture. Walk me through the network topology." She hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "I can pull up the schematics." "Please," she turned to her monitor, and as she typed, Ethan watched her hands. They were completely steady, but her shoulders were doing something different, like she was bracing. He made a note on his yellow pad and said nothing yet. Outside the third-floor windows, the city went about its morning. Traffic moved. People lived their ordinary lives. Somewhere across town, Sophie was probably already halfway through her school day, probably arguing with some kid about whether dinosaurs or sharks would win in a fight. A debate Ethan had embarrassingly spent about 40 minutes researching so he could give her an informed position. He thought about her for exactly 3 seconds, the way he always did during the early part of a job. A kind of anchoring, a reminder of what was actual and real and worth protecting. Then he looked at the schematics Olivia had pulled up, and something in the architecture of the system, something small, something that didn't belong, caught his eye immediately. He leaned forward. "Can you zoom in on this section?" he said, pointing to a cluster of nodes in the lower right corner of the diagram. "Right here." Olivia's hand on the mouse went still for just a moment before she scrolled in. The system showed a standard emergency network, exit control, fire suppression triggers, communication fail-safes. Everything you'd expect to see in a modern security infrastructure facility. Everything documented, labeled, accounted for. Except for one junction point that connected to a secondary pathway that led nowhere, the diagram acknowledged. Ethan didn't say anything yet. He picked up his yellow pen and drew a small circle around the point on his printed copy. "What's this pathway?" he asked. Olivia Carter looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked at Ethan, and something in her expression very quietly broke open. "I've been trying to figure out the same thing," she said, "for 6 months." The silence that followed. Olivia Carter's words was not the comfortable kind. It was the kind of silence that forms when someone has just said something they can't unsay, and both people in the room know it. The other 2 compliance staff members were still at their desks, but they'd gone very quiet in the particular way of people who are pretending to look at their screens while actually tracking every word being spoken 3 feet away from them. Ethan looked at Olivia steadily. He didn't push. He'd learned a long time ago that pushing was the wrong move when someone was standing at the edge of something. You waited. You made the space. You let them decide how far they were willing to go. She decided to go further. "Can we talk somewhere else?" she said. He nodded. "Lead the way." She took him to a small conference room at the end of the hall, the kind that nobody books because it was too far from the elevators and the chairs were uncomfortable. She closed the door. She didn't sit down. She stood near the window with her arms crossed, looking out at the parking structure below for a moment, and then she looked at him. "I need to know something first," she said. "Before I tell you anything, are you actually here for the inspection, Or did someone send you because of what's in that system? I'm here because the city contract requires an independent safety audit before signing, Ethan said. Nobody told me anything was wrong. I'm telling you that because it's true, and because you deserve a straight answer. She studied him. Her eyes were sharp. Not suspicious exactly, but careful in the way of someone who had been wrong about who to trust before and was still paying for it. Okay, she said. Okay. She pulled out a chair and sat down, and the way she did it, the slight exhale, the drop in her shoulders, made her look suddenly much more tired than she'd seemed downstairs. 6 months ago, I was running routine diagnostics on the emergency control network. We were doing a full systems review in preparation for the contract bid. I found a secondary data pathway, unlabeled, not in any documentation I had access to. The junction in the lower right quadrant, Ethan said. She looked at him. You saw it that fast. I've been reading these kinds of schematics for a long time, he said. It wasn't a boast. It was just the fact. Right. She rubbed the edge of her thumb against her palm, a small, unconscious gesture. So I flagged it, wrote it up as an anomaly report, submitted it through the internal compliance channel. Standard protocol. She paused. Nothing happened. No response, no acknowledgement, no follow-up ticket. I checked the system a week later, and the report was gone. Gone, Ethan repeated. Deleted or just closed? Gone. Like it had never been submitted. There was no record of it in the queue, no record of it being received, no record of it being reviewed. I went back and checked my own sent items and the submission receipt I'd saved. Those were still there. But in the compliance system itself, it had vanished. Ethan wrote something on his yellow pad. What did you do? I resubmitted. 2 more times. Both disappeared. So I tried a different channel. I sent a direct email to the compliance director. He responded 3 days later saying he'd reviewed my concern and found nothing unusual in the system architecture. She said it flatly. The way you say things when you've repeated them so many times they've worn down to just the facts. I asked him to send me his review documentation. He said it was internal and not subject to staff distribution. And you didn't believe him? No, she said simply. I didn't. Because I had looked at that pathway for 100 hours by that point, and there was no normal explanation for it. It connected to nodes that control emergency exits, fire suppression communication, the building's external alert broadcasting system, and 3 junctions that interface directly with the city's emergency response network. She let that sit for a second. Not just this building, the city network. Ethan stopped writing. Olivia, he said, and his voice was still even, but something in it had shifted just slightly. How far into that secondary pathway were you able to get? Far enough to confirm it was executable, she said. It's not passive. It's not a data logging branch or a legacy diagnostic line that someone forgot to remove. It has command functions. I documented 5 of them before I lost access. Someone locked me out of the diagnostic layer about a week after my 3rd report disappeared. She reached into the pocket of her blazer and took out a folded piece of paper. Actual paper, handwritten. She set it on the table between them. I wrote it down manually because I didn't trust the digital record. Ethan looked at the paper without picking it up. 5 functions, written in Olivia's cramped, precise hand. Emergency exit control, lock override, fire suppression, communication disable, evidence archive, selective erasure, external alert, broadcast block, city emergency interface, access suspension. He read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair. Has anyone else seen this? He asked. My direct supervisor knows I flagged something, but he thinks I'm chasing a ghost. He told me to focus on the contract documentation and stop creating problems during a critical period. Her mouth did something dry and humorless. Those were his exact words. Stop creating problems during a critical period. What's your supervisor's name? Derek Ewan. He's a good person, she said, and there was something in the way she said it that sounded like she'd needed to tell herself that more than once lately. I don't think he knows what's actually in that system. I think he was told there was nothing unusual, and he believed it because it was easier than not believing it. And now he's in a position where admitting he should have pushed harder is uncomfortable. Ethan understood that calculus. He'd seen it before, not malice, just the ordinary human gravity of convenience, the way people slope toward the explanation that requires the least of them. It was its own kind of failure, but a different kind than deliberate concealment. What about outside the company? He asked. Did you report to anyone external? The look she gave him was complicated. I thought about it. For a long time. But I didn't know who to go to, and I didn't know how much trouble I was already in just for flagging it internally. I have a lease. I have student loans. I have a mother in assisted living. She said it without apology, but without pretense either, just the plain arithmetic of a person who understood exactly what they stood to lose. I kept telling myself someone with more authority would catch it, that the city's own review process would find it when the contract audit happened. That's why I'm here, Ethan said. I know. She looked at him. I know that now. He picked up the handwritten paper. Can I keep this? It's a copy, she said. I have the original somewhere you're not going to find easily. He almost smiled. Good. He folded it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of his bag behind the stegosaurus. Then he looked at his notes. The junction point. The 5 functions. 6 months of suppressed reports. A compliance director who'd given a dismissal too quickly to be believable. He turned it all over in his mind the way he did with safety problems, not jumping to conclusions, just looking at the shape of it, trying to understand what the structure was actually built to do. I need access to the system, he said. The full emergency network architecture, not the version you showed me upstairs. Olivia looked at him steadily. If I give you that access, and someone notices, someone might notice, he said honestly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I have a city authorization that gives me legal right to inspect this infrastructure. If anyone interferes with that inspection, they're not just being obstructive. They're obstructing a regulatory process. That's a different category of problem for them. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her weighing it. Not dramatically, not with visible anguish, just the private calculation of a person deciding whether the thing they already knew was right was also worth the cost. Okay, she said. I'll get you in. They went back to the compliance office. The other 2 staff members had apparently decided the best approach to the morning's tension was to become completely absorbed in their own work, which Ethan respected. Olivia sat at her station, typed a sequence he couldn't see from his angle, and then nodded toward the monitor. You're going to want to pull your chair over, she said. He did. And for the next 2.5 hours, they worked. The outer layer of the emergency network was exactly what it was supposed to be. Well documented, clearly structured, the kind of infrastructure you'd expect from a company bidding for a major city contract. Someone had done good work on the surface. That was the first thing Ethan registered, and it was important. This wasn't a case of generally sloppy engineering. The visible architecture was competent. The concealment of what was underneath it was also competent. That combination told him something. He worked methodically, the way he always did, tracing pathways from their documented endpoints backward toward their origins. It was slow. It was the kind of work that required holding a lot of information in your head at once and not losing track of the thread when the system threw up an authentication wall or a pathway looped back on itself in a way that didn't quite add up. Olivia worked alongside him, and she was good, genuinely good, the kind of engineer who understood not just how systems were built, but how they were meant to behave, which made her twice as useful when something was misbehaving. She found the access point to the secondary layer at 11:47. Here, she said, and there was a quiet tightness in her voice. This is where I lost access before, the diagnostic layer. Ethan leaned in. The access prompt was using a non-standard authentication protocol. Not the company's documented security system, but something separate, layered underneath it, accessible only through a junction that the main system's documentation didn't acknowledge existed. He typed his city authorization code, which gave him inspector-level access to safety infrastructure under the City Standards Act. The system rejected it. He tried the secondary authorization code, the one issued for cases of disputed access, which carried the weight of the city manager's office behind it. The system rejected that too. He sat back and looked at the screen. This isn't a company security protocol, he said. This authentication layer was written by someone external, custom code. How can you tell? Olivia asked. The error response format. It's not matching Titan Shield's documented system language. This was built separately and installed underneath the existing architecture. He paused. Which means someone with deep access to this building's infrastructure built a secondary program into it that the company's own documentation doesn't reflect. He wrote something. Do you know who had that level of access in the last 2 years? Olivia was quiet for a moment. The emergency network was overhauled 14 months ago. It was managed by Marcus Steele's team. He had full administrative access during the implementation window. Marcus Steele, the security director who'd called the police before verifying a credential. The man who'd materialized in the lobby with the particular readiness of someone who had something to protect. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He was looking at the rejection screen, thinking about the shape of what he was looking at. A hidden program. Custom authentication. Functions that could lock people in buildings, disable alerts, erase records. Installed by someone who'd had the access and the technical knowledge to hide it well enough that a good engineer like Olivia had spent 6 months trying to get anyone to pay attention. The city contract, Ethan said. If Titan Shield wins this, what systems would they be interfacing with? Olivia understood immediately what he was asking. The municipal security network, emergency response coordination, public building infrastructure across 14 city facilities. He let that settle. 14 city facilities. Emergency coordination. If the hidden program's functions, exit locks, alert blocks, evidence erasure, were extensible through the city interface, they weren't just talking about what could happen inside this building. They were talking about what could happen across the city. We need to document everything we can access, he said, right now, before anything changes. They worked through lunch. Nobody brought food. Ethan drank the last cold inch of Mrs. Paola's travel mug coffee and didn't notice until he tipped the empty mug and got nothing. Olivia worked with the focused, slightly grim efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this and was not going to waste it. They were documenting the third confirmed anomalous junction when the conference room door opened. Marcus Steele walked in without knocking. He looked at the screens. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Olivia. The sequence was deliberate. He processed the situation fully before he spoke, which told Ethan that Marcus Steele was not a man who reacted before he understood what he was reacting to. That was a useful thing to know. Inspector Mercer, Marcus said pleasantly, I wanted to check in on the inspection progress. Appreciate that, Ethan said, and his voice was easy. We're working through the emergency network schematics, standard part of the audit process. Of course. Marcus's eyes moved briefly to the monitor, then back to Ethan. I want to make sure you have everything you need. Is Ms. Carter being helpful? Very, Ethan said. Good. A small pause. I noticed you requested access to the diagnostic layer. That triggered an alert. Our system flags unusual access attempts automatically. Can you tell me what you're looking for specifically? I might be able to get you what you need more directly. It was well constructed, helpful on the surface, and underneath it, a very clear message. I know what you tried to access, and I'm here. I'm doing a full architecture trace, Ethan said. It's routine. Part of the authorization under the City Standards Act is access to all safety-relevant system layers. If there's a specific channel I should be using to request that access, I'm happy to go through the proper process. Absolutely, Marcus said. I'll have our IT security team set you up with appropriate access credentials. Should be ready within the hour. He smiled. It was the smile of someone who knew that within the hour, a lot of things could change. I just wanted to make sure we were giving you everything you need. We want this process to go smoothly. That's all I want too, Ethan said. Marcus nodded. He looked at Olivia once more. Not long, not with anything that could be pointed to specifically, just a look that lasted a beat too long. Then he left. The door closed. Olivia let out a slow breath. He knows, she said. Her voice was barely above quiet. He knows I'm looking, Ethan said. He doesn't know how much I've found. What do we do? Ethan looked at what was on the screen. They had documentation of 3 anomalous junctions, Olivia's handwritten function list, and the access rejection logs from the diagnostic layer, which were themselves a form of evidence, because a system that required custom authentication to access shouldn't exist inside a facility that was claiming to have fully disclosed infrastructure to a city auditor. We secure what we have, he said. He took out his phone, a deliberate choice, not the building's network, nothing that touched their system, and photographed every screen methodically. Then he wrote a detailed page of notes in longhand. Then he put his phone and his notepad in the inner pocket of his bag, separated from the building's network. Does anyone else in this building know what you found? He asked Olivia. She hesitated. I talked to one other person, 3 months ago. Another engineer on the safety team, a guy named Peter Lynn. I trusted him. I showed him my original documentation. What happened? He transferred to a different department 2 weeks later. He hasn't spoken to me since. She said it quietly, without drama. I don't know if he was pressured or if he just decided it wasn't worth it. I stopped asking. Ethan filed that away. He looked at his notes again, then looked at Olivia. She was sitting straight, hands in her lap, with the composure of someone who had made a decision and was living inside it now, which was the only place decisions actually existed. You did the right thing, he said, 6 months ago, and today. She looked at him with something slightly complicated in her expression. I'm not sure it counts as doing the right thing if you kept it inside the company and nothing changed. You kept it documented, he said. You kept copies. You didn't let them convince you that you'd misread it. That's not nothing. That's actually the hard part. She didn't answer right away. Then, do you actually think you can do something about this? He thought about it honestly, the way he always tried to when someone asked him a real question. He thought about the shape of what he'd found, the custom authentication, the city interface, the 5 functions on Olivia's handwritten paper. He thought about Marcus Steele's smile and the 1-hour timeline he'd just handed them, which was not a convenience but a clock. Yes, he said, but the next few hours are going to matter. He stood, picked up his bag, and was about to say something else when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A text from a number that wasn't in his contacts, which was unusual enough that he read it immediately. It said, "They're already building a file on you. Meeting in Steele's office 20 minutes ago." Corporate espionage is the phrase they used. Be careful who you send anything to. No name. No other context. Ethan read it twice. Then he looked at Olivia. Does anyone in this building know my phone number? She frowned. I don't. Why? He showed her the screen. She read it. The color in her face shifted slightly. Peter, she said. Peter Lynn. That's the only person who... He must still have it from when I gave it to him 3 months ago, in case he ever wanted to... She stopped. He's warning you. He's warning me, Ethan agreed. He put his phone back in his pocket and looked at the clock on the wall. It was 12:42. The 1-hour window Marcus had given him for IT credentials would end around 1:30, which meant Marcus expected to have something arranged before then. Not credentials, something else. Something that reframed what Ethan was doing in this building from inspection to intrusion. Corporate espionage. It was not a charge that would hold. Not against his credentials. Not against the city authorization. Not against 11 years of documented work. But it didn't have to hold. It just had to create enough noise and confusion to derail the inspection, contaminate the evidence chain, and buy time. A few days. Enough for the contract to be signed. Enough for whatever was in that hidden system to become the city's problem instead of Titan shields. Ethan thought about 14 city buildings. He thought about exit locks and suppressed alerts and the erasure of evidence. He thought about what those functions were actually designed to accomplish once the city contract was in place, and the shape of it in his mind was something that required a long breath before he could look at it steadily. He looked at it steadily. I need to make a phone call, he said to Olivia. From outside the building. Give me 10 minutes. She nodded. I'll keep working. He walked to the stairwell, not the elevator, and took it down to the ground floor exit on the side of the building, away from the main lobby cameras. He pushed through the door into the flat gray afternoon air and dialed a number he knew by memory. It rang twice. Then Commissioner Hargrove picked up. That was fast, Hargrove said. Tell me you found something straightforward. I found something, Ethan said. It's not straightforward. A pause. How bad? Ethan looked out at the parking structure, at the ordinary afternoon traffic moving beyond the lot, at the city going about its life with no knowledge of the architecture sitting underneath it. Bad enough that I need you to quietly notify the City Safety Standards Office and the Inspector General's office. Not officially yet. I don't have the full picture, but they need to know something may be coming. Another pause, longer. Ethan, what are we dealing with? Someone built a hidden program into this system, Ethan said. It has override functions for emergency exits, alert systems, evidence records, and city emergency infrastructure interfaces. I don't know the full intent yet, but it's executable, it's active, and if this contract signs before we understand what it does... He stopped. Let the end of that sentence exist without filling it in, because Hargrove was smart enough to hear what wasn't said. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. "I'll make the calls," Hargrove said. "Stay clean. Document everything." "Already doing it." "And Ethan." A beat. "Watch your back in there. The people who build things like that don't usually appreciate someone finding them." "I know," Ethan said. He hung up. He stood in the gray afternoon air for another moment, not because he needed to compose himself, but because there was something grounding about standing on actual pavement with actual sky overhead before going back into a building where someone was already working on a story that put him on the wrong side of the law. He thought briefly about Sophie, about dinosaur pajamas and the sound of a fan pointed at a wall and the particular piece of a 7-year-old who had argued her way into your bed and fallen asleep in 30 seconds. Then he went back inside. He took the stairs again. He was 1 floor from the 3rd floor landing when the stairwell door above him opened. He heard voices before he saw anyone, 2 of them, neither careful about volume, which meant they didn't know he was there. "She's been talking to him all morning. Ewan says she had him in the side conference room for almost an hour." Marcus's voice. And another, lower, that Ethan didn't recognize. "What do you want to do about Carter?" A pause. Footsteps, moving down. They were coming toward the landing. "She's been a problem for 6 months, Marcus said. "We put a flag on her access 3 months ago. If she's given him anything useful, that's on her." Another pause. "Pull her credentials after 5. She's terminated. Frame it as a performance issue. I'll have HR draft something." The footsteps were very close now. Ethan had maybe 2 seconds. He pushed through the 2nd floor door and let it close quietly behind him, and stood in the 2nd floor corridor until the footsteps in the stairwell moved past and down. He stood there with his hand on the door, breathing normally, thinking about what he'd just heard. He thought, she trusted her company to handle this for 6 months, and they spent that time building a case against her. He thought, she loses her job tonight if I don't move fast enough. He thought, that's not how this ends. He pushed himself off the door and headed for the elevator, because the stairwell was now occupied and time, as it tended to do when things started moving, had just gotten considerably shorter. Ethan got back to the 3rd floor in 4 minutes. He didn't run. Running attracts attention, and attention was the last thing he needed right now. He walked with the particular purposeful calm of someone who knew exactly where he was going and had every right to be there, which was the only armor available to him at the moment, and he intended to wear it well. Olivia was at her desk when he came back in. She looked up immediately, reading something in his face before he said a word. "What happened?" she said. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the other 2 staff members. They were still at their stations, still doing the polite fiction of not listening. He set his bag down and leaned slightly toward Olivia. "I need to talk to you, not here." She understood. She stood, picked up a folder that may or may not have had anything in it, and followed him into the narrow hallway. He told her quietly and directly. The stairwell conversation, Marcus's voice, the specific phrase, "Pull her credentials after 5, frame it as performance." She didn't react the way some people would. She didn't go pale or make a sound. She just stood there and let it land, and what moved across her face was something complicated and tired, like a person receiving news they had already half prepared for. "Okay," she said after a moment. "Okay?" he repeated. "I mean, I'm surprised it's today. I thought I had more time." She let out a breath. "I don't know why I thought that." "You're not going to lose this job over a termination they manufacture," Ethan said. "Not if we move correctly. But I need you to do something for me in the next hour." She looked at him steadily. "What do you need?" "Every piece of documentation you have, the original anomaly reports, the submission receipts, the email exchange with the compliance director. Everything you said disappeared from the system and everything you saved personally. I need copies, not on this network. External drive, your personal email, something that lives completely outside Titan Shield's infrastructure." She was already nodding. "I have a personal drive at my desk. I've been putting things on it for months, quietly." "Good." He meant it. "After 5 o'clock today, they may revoke your building access. Make sure everything you need is out before then." She looked at him for a second. "You know, when you showed up this morning, I thought you were going to be like every other auditor. Walk through the checklist, sign the papers, go home." A pause. "I'm glad I was wrong." Don't thank me yet, he said. We still have a lot of ground to cover. They went back in. Ethan returned to the monitor and kept working, but the nature of what he was doing had shifted. He was no longer simply mapping the architecture. He was building a case, a documented, time-stamped, externally verifiable record of everything the hidden system contained before Marcus Steele's hour ran out and whatever was coming next arrived. He photographed screens. He wrote longhand notes that lived in his bag on paper that had never touched their network. He cross-referenced junction points against Olivia's handwritten list and found 2 additional functions she hadn't been able to document before she'd lost diagnostic access. One of them was a remote activation trigger, meaning the hidden program didn't just have to be engaged from inside the building. Someone with the right credentials and an external connection could execute it from anywhere. That was the piece that changed the weight of everything. Because a system you had to be physically present to activate was a security risk. A system you could trigger remotely while you were somewhere else entirely, somewhere with witnesses, somewhere with an alibi, was something built with intent, built by someone who had thought ahead, built by someone who planned to use it. He wrote that down and underlined it once. At 1:15, his phone buzzed. A text from Hargrove. IG office notified. City safety standards standing by. You have 48 hours before this becomes official. That's as long as I can hold the line. Use it. 48 hours. He looked at the clock. He looked at the monitor. He looked at how much he still didn't know. He wrote, "Need the original source code author for the secondary program. Can anyone pull build signatures from City IT?" Hargrove came back in 2 minutes, working on it. He put the phone away and kept going. At 1:43, the IT credentials Marcus had promised never materialized, which was its own confirmation. Instead, at 1:49, Claire Ashford walked into the compliance office. She didn't have Marcus with her this time. She came alone, which Ethan noted. She looked at the room, at Olivia, at Ethan seated at the monitor with his notepad and his battered bag, and something in her expression was harder to read than it had been in the lobby. The composed authority was still there, but underneath it was something with more friction. A morning that had not gone the way she'd expected it to. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "could I have a moment?" He closed his notepad without making a show of it and turned his chair to face her. "Of course." She looked at the other staff members and said pleasantly but unmistakably, "Could you two give us the room for a few minutes?" They left without looking at anyone. Olivia moved to stand and Claire said, "You can stay, Olivia," which surprised him slightly, and he thought it surprised Olivia too. Claire stood in the middle of the room. She didn't sit. People who were used to authority rarely sat in rooms they didn't control. "I owe you an apology," she said, and the way she delivered it was clipped and uncomfortable, like clothing that didn't quite fit. Not insincere, but unpracticed. He got the impression she didn't apologize often. "What happened this morning in the lobby was unprofessional. I made an assumption based on appearance, and I was wrong to act on it." "I appreciate that," Ethan said. He meant it, as far as it went. She looked at him levelly. "I also want to ask you directly, one professional to another. Is there something specific in our systems that's concerning you? Marcus tells me you attempted to access our diagnostic layer, which is outside the standard inspection scope." There it was. Not aggressive, Zect, framed as professional courtesy, legitimate inquiry. But it was Marcus's question, delivered through Claire's mouth. She didn't know it was his question. Ethan was fairly certain of that, which meant Marcus had spoken to her between the stairwell and now, and had positioned Ethan's diagnostic access attempt as irregular rather than standard, and Claire had believed him because she had no reason not to. Ethan made a decision. "Ms. Ashford," he said, "the diagnostic layer is within my authorized scope under the City Standards Act. If Marcus told you otherwise, I'd encourage you to read the authorization documentation your legal team received on the 14th. He paused. "I have found some anomalies in your emergency network architecture that I need to trace fully before I can say more. That's not unusual. Anomalies are part of what I look for. But I want to be straightforward with you. I'm not done yet, and I can't give you a clean answer until I am." She listened. Her face gave very little. "What kind of anomalies?" "Architectural inconsistencies," he said. "Pathways that aren't reflected in your documented schematics." Something moved behind her eyes. Not recognition, or not exactly. Something more like the particular unease of a person who has just heard a sentence that they can't yet fully translate, but that sounds wrong in a way that matters. That would be a documentation issue, she said slowly. Engineering oversight. It might be, he said. He held her gaze. Or it might be something else. I need more time to determine which. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how much more time? I'd like to be back in the system by end of day. I'd also like access to your building management logs for the last 14 months. Specifically, the emergency network overhaul window. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. He could see her working through something, the quiet arithmetic of a person with more information than she was consciously acknowledging and less control over the situation than she was accustomed to having. I'll authorize the log access, she said. I'll speak to IT personally. Not through Marcus. Ethan noticed that. He chose not to point it out. Thank you. She was almost to the door when she stopped. She didn't turn all the way around. How long have you been doing this work? She asked. 11 years, he said. A pause. Do you usually find what you're looking for? He thought about that honestly. Not always, he said. But when something is there, I usually know before I can prove it. And I know. She left. The door closed. Olivia turned from where she'd been standing near the window, very still through the entire exchange. She didn't know, Olivia said. It wasn't quite a question. About the program specifically? No, Ethan said. About the fact that something isn't right? She's starting to. Is that good or bad? He thought about it. Depends on what she does with it. He picked up his pen. He had a lot of ground left to cover, and the afternoon was moving faster than he wanted it to. The building management logs came through at 2:30, not through IT, but delivered personally by Claire's executive assistant, which meant Claire had gone around Marcus to get them. That was a data point. He filed it carefully alongside everything else. He went through the logs with the methodical patience that was the core tool of his work, more than any technical knowledge or credential. Patience was the thing that distinguished real safety work from paperwork compliance. The willingness to sit with the boring middle of a log file at 2:30 in the afternoon when the obvious answer wasn't appearing, and you had to wait for the thing that was hiding between the normal entries. He found it at 2:58. It was a 14-minute window in the building management logs, 11 months ago, a Tuesday afternoon in September, between 2:17 and 2:31. During that window, every camera on floors 2 through 5 had gone offline simultaneously. The log noted it as a scheduled maintenance window, authorized by the security director, Marcus Steele. 14 minutes. Ethan thought about what you could install in 14 minutes with the right access, the right tools, and no cameras running. He thought about the custom authentication layer in the secondary program, the one that wasn't written in Titan Shield's system language. Custom code took time to write, but not to deploy. If you wrote it off-site and arrived ready to install, 14 minutes was plenty. He wrote the timestamp down. He wrote Marcus Steele's authorization signature. He took a photograph of the log page. Then he kept reading, because the log that told you something happened was useful, but the log that told you who else was in the building that afternoon was what you actually needed. Visitor records for that date. He found them in the 4th file. One visitor arriving at 2:11, departing at 2:44. Badge issued at the executive entrance, which bypassed the main lobby. Name on the visitor log, V. Ashford. He stared at that for a moment. Victor Ashford, not Claire. Victor, the company chairman, Claire's father, whose name Ethan had seen on the original contract bid documentation as board signatory. A man who, as chairman, had no operational reason to be in the building on a Tuesday afternoon visiting for 33 minutes through the executive entrance while the cameras on multiple floors were conveniently offline. Ethan sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Not dramatically, just the way you look at a neutral surface when you're reorganizing a lot of information inside your head and you need somewhere to put your eyes while you do it. The shape of it was coming clear now. Marcus Steele had built the program. He had the technical access, the 14-minute window, and the authorization signature to make it happen. But Marcus Steele was a security director. He was capable and methodical and clearly not stupid, but a custom program with city infrastructure interfaces was not a solo project born from a security director's initiative. Someone had commissioned it. Someone had defined what it needed to do and why. Victor Ashford, chairman, the man who stood to gain most if the city contract signed, The man who had been in the building, off camera, the day the program was installed. And Claire, CEO, signing authority on the contract, her name on every document, had her digital signature on the bid package, on the compliance certifications, on the statements that represented Titan Shield's safety infrastructure as fully disclosed and regulation compliant. Was Claire's signature legitimate? Did she know what was underneath her name? Ethan didn't know yet. But a woman who apologized uncomfortably and then went around her security director to get him building logs was not behaving like someone running a conspiracy. She was behaving like someone who was starting to suspect she'd been kept in the dark about something in her own house, which was its own kind of damning and a different kind entirely. His phone buzzed. Hargrove again. City IT came back. Build signatures on the secondary program don't match any registered Titan Shield developer ID. Whoever wrote it wasn't on their payroll. We're running the signatures against contractor databases. Ethan typed back. Run V. Ashford against any registered shell entities or contractor relationships. Also, pull the executive visitor log for Titan Shield September of last year. I'm looking at something. He put his phone away and looked at Olivia, who had been working quietly beside him and tracking enough of his expression to know the afternoon had moved somewhere significant. Tell me what you know about Victor Ashford, he said. She thought about it. He's the founder. He built the company from a regional security systems firm into what it is now. He stepped back from day-to-day operations about 3 years ago when Claire took the CEO role, but he's still chairman and he controls a majority of the board. She paused. People here are, she chose the word carefully, careful around him. More careful than around Claire. He doesn't come into the office often, but when he does, the whole building knows within 10 minutes. What's his relationship with Marcus? She looked at him. It was a look that suggested the question was landing somewhere she'd thought about before. Marcus was Victor's hire, not Claire's. Victor brought him in as security director about 3 years ago, the same time Claire took the CEO role. Claire inherited him. She said it in the tone of someone noting a fact they find meaningful but hadn't known how to use until this moment. I always thought it was a little odd that Victor would place his own person in security right when he was supposedly stepping back. A little odd, Ethan said quietly. Yeah. He looked at his note. The program. The 14-minute window. Victor in the building. Marcus's authorization. Claire's inherited security director. 6 months of Olivia's reports disappearing into a compliance channel that led, if you followed it, to a director who reported not to Claire but to the board. And the board's controlling vote was Victor Ashford. The disappearing reports hadn't been an IT failure. Someone had been monitoring the compliance channel and removing anything that got too close to the secondary program. And whoever had that kind of access to the compliance system was either Marcus himself or someone above him. And the corporate espionage framing, the file Marcus was building on Ethan, that wasn't improvised. That was a prepared response, a contingency, which meant someone had thought about the possibility of an inspector finding the program and had a plan ready. You didn't prepare a contingency unless you knew you needed one. You didn't know you needed one unless you knew what you were hiding. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Different number this time, the Inspector General's office. He stepped into the hall to take it. The IG's deputy, a woman named Sandra Chu, spoke in the practiced neutral tone of someone who dealt in institutional disaster daily and had learned not to editorialize. She confirmed they'd received Hargrove's notification. She confirmed they were treating it as preliminary intelligence, not yet an active investigation. She asked him 2 questions. Could he certify that his documentation was independently obtained without network contamination? And did he have reason to believe the contract signing timeline was being accelerated? He answered yes to both. We'll need your physical documentation no later than end of business tomorrow, she said. Everything analog. Nothing that touched their system. I'll have it to you by noon, he said. He went back inside. At 4:10, Marcus Steele made his second appearance of the day. This time he had someone with him, a younger man in an IT department shirt who was carrying a tablet and looking at it rather than at anyone in the room, the practiced invisibility of someone brought along to perform a task and not to witness anything. We've got your diagnostic credentials ready, Marcus said, and his voice was easy and professional, the voice of a man who had decided that the play was to look completely cooperative. My IT team can set you up directly on your workstation. Ethan looked at the IT tech. What's the access level? The tech looked up. Inspector Tier. Full read access to safety-relevant systems architecture. Including the diagnostic layer? A brief pause. The tech glanced at Marcus. Marcus said smoothly, "The diagnostic layer has some proprietary encryption. For security reasons. We'd need to walk you through what's accessible under your authorization and what falls under trade secret protection." There it was. Ethan looked at Marcus. He took his time with it. Not hostile, just steady. Trade secret protection doesn't apply to safety infrastructure under a city contract audit. Section 12 of the City Standards Act is pretty clear on that. If there's infrastructure in this building that interfaces with municipal emergency systems, I have the right to inspect it fully. Marcus's easy expression didn't crack, but something behind it recalibrated. "I'm not a lawyer," he said pleasantly. "That's a question for our legal team. In the meantime, I can give you what our legal department has cleared for inspection access." "Then I'd like that conversation with your legal team in writing before end of business today," Ethan said. "If they're restricting my access on trade secret grounds, I need a formal written invocation so I can challenge it through the City Standards Office." A pause. "That seems like an escalation that isn't necessary at this point." "It's just documentation," Ethan said. "I'm sure your legal team will have no problem putting their position in writing." Marcus looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then he smiled the same smile as before and said he'd be in touch, and he left with the IT tech behind him. Olivia leaned slightly toward Ethan. "They're not going to give you that in writing," she said under her breath. "No," he agreed. "But them refusing to put it in writing is itself documentation." He made a note of the time, the offer, and the nature of the restriction claimed. He added it to the stack. At 4:47, 13 minutes before Marcus's intended credential pull deadline, Ethan watched Olivia quietly plug a small external drive into her workstation and begin transferring files. She did it with complete composure, the unhurried steadiness of someone who had thought about this moment and decided not to waste it on panic. He didn't watch too directly. That was her process, and she'd earned the right to it. At 5:02, her badge reader flashed red when she tried to leave the compliance office for the restroom. She came back, sat down, and looked at Ethan. "They moved it up," she said quietly. He picked up his phone and sent a single text to Hargrove. "They've locked out a key witness inside the building. Need someone from City Standards at this address within the hour." Then he stood up, walked to the compliance office door, and opened it. Marcus Steele was in the corridor, not arriving, already there. He'd been outside the door, which told Ethan that the timing of the credential revocation was not coincidental. "Marcus," Ethan said, "Ms. Carter's building access has been restricted." "I'm aware," Marcus said. "It's an HR matter, doesn't concern the inspection." "It concerns me when a person I've been working with during an authorized inspection has her access revoked mid-workday," Ethan said. "That's obstruction of a city audit process." "That's a significant word," Marcus said. "It's the accurate word." Ethan held his gaze. "And I've documented the timeline." Something shifted in Marcus Steele's expression. Not fear exactly, not in a man like him, but a reassessment. A recalibration of what Ethan had and hadn't been doing in that compliance office all day. Because a man who was just mapping system architecture didn't talk about documented timelines. A man building a legal record did. "Inspector Mercer," Marcus said, and his voice was still controlled but had lost the pleasant coating. "I think it would be in everyone's interest if you wrapped up for the day. You can resume tomorrow after we've clarified the scope of access with our legal team." "I'll wrap up when my authorized inspection is complete," Ethan said. "If you'd like to formally request that I leave, I'd need that in writing, citing specific legal grounds. Otherwise, I'm continuing." A long pause. "We'll get you that in writing," Marcus said. He walked away down the corridor. Ethan went back inside and looked at Olivia. Her face was controlled, but her hands had a slight tension in them, the kind that comes from understanding exactly how exposed you are. "He's going to escalate," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "So am I." He picked up his phone. "Before he gets a document drafted, I need your external drive. Not to keep. I'm going to make a secondary copy on mine. You keep the original." She handed it across without hesitation. He was copying files when his phone rang. Not Hargrove. A different number, one he didn't recognize, with a city area code. He answered. "Is this Ethan Mercer?" A man's voice. Older, controlled. the particular timbre of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room he occupied. "My name is Victor Ashford. I'd like to speak with you." Ethan looked at the file copy progress on his drive. 63%. "Mr. Ashford," he said, "I'd be happy to speak with you." "I'm in the building," Victor said. "I can be at the compliance office in 3 minutes." "I'll be here." He hung up. He looked at the drive progress. 78%. He looked at Olivia. "Victor Ashford is coming here." She went very still. "Now?" 3 minutes. The drive hit 100% at the 2-minute mark. He ejected it, put it in his bag alongside his own copy, and zipped the inner pocket. He set his notepad on the desk in front of him, open, pen beside it, and waited. Victor Ashford was 71 and looked like a man who had decided somewhere in his 50s that age was something that happened to other people. He was tall, lean, with the kind of silver hair that photographed well, and eyes that moved quickly over a room before settling where they intended to settle. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than Ethan's truck and wore it the way old money people wore things, like it was simply the natural state of fabric. He came in without knocking. He looked at Olivia first, not for long, but long enough to communicate that he knew who she was and had already formed his assessment. And then he looked at Ethan. He didn't extend his hand. He pulled out a chair across from Ethan's and sat down. And the act of sitting was itself a kind of territorial claim, the way powerful people use furniture. "I understand you've had a productive day," Victor said. "I've been doing my job," Ethan said. "Of course." A pause. "I also understand there's been some confusion about access scope. I want to assure you that Titan Shield is fully committed to transparency in the audit process." "That's good to hear," Ethan said, "because I've had some difficulty accessing the diagnostic layer of your emergency network." Victor nodded slowly, as if receiving a reasonable concern. "I'm aware. Our IT team flagged it as a protocol issue. They want to make sure proprietary architectural elements are properly separated from safety compliance data before providing access. Under Section 12 of the City Standards Act, that separation isn't legally permissible for infrastructure that interfaces with municipal emergency systems," Ethan said. "Your legal team should be able to confirm that." "They're reviewing it," Victor said. His voice was patient, the patience of someone who is very good at waiting. "I'm sure we can resolve this tomorrow." "The contract signing is scheduled for this week," Ethan said. "I can't certify this facility before my inspection is complete." Victor looked at him for a moment. Something in his expression, not hostile, not warm, just precise, the look of a man calculating distance. "Mr. Mercer, I've reviewed your professional record. You're clearly very good at what you do. 11 years, serious work. Commissioner Hargrove speaks highly of you." He laced his fingers together on the table between them. "I want to make sure this process ends cleanly for everyone involved. What would you need to feel confident signing off on this inspection?" And there it was. Not a threat, not a request. An offer, phrased as accommodation, delivered with the practiced ease of a man who had navigated regulatory processes for decades and understood that everyone had a number, a need, a point at which cooperation became attractive. Ethan looked at Victor Ashford for a long moment. He thought about the 14-minute camera blackout. He thought about the visitor log. He thought about 5 functions on a handwritten piece of paper that described what this hidden program could do to a city's emergency infrastructure. "I need full access to the diagnostic layer," Ethan said, "and I need the building management logs for the 14-month period following the emergency network overhaul." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Barely. A recalibration so small that if you weren't watching for it, you'd miss it. "I see," he said. The room was very quiet for a moment. "I'll see what I can arrange," Victor said. He stood. "I appreciate your directness, Mr. Mercer." He straightened his jacket, and then he looked at Olivia once more. The same look, brief, precise, and he left. Ethan sat in the silence after the door closed and thought about what that look meant. He thought about Marcus and the 5 o'clock credential pull. He thought about a man who had just heard the specific words, building management logs, and 14 months, and had shown nothing except one moment of recalibration that lasted less than a second. He thought, he knows exactly what's in those logs. He thought, he came here to see how much I know. He thought, now he does. He looked at Olivia. Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight that isn't your apartment? She stared at him. What? I'm not saying you're in physical danger, he said carefully. I'm saying that after today, you are a person who has documents that matter, and the people who want those documents to disappear are now aware of that. He met her eyes. Is there somewhere you can go? A friend, a family member, somewhere off the usual path? She was quiet for a moment, processing. My cousin lives 40 minutes out, she said. I haven't been there in months. That's a good place to be tonight, he said. Take your external drive. Don't use any Titan Shield accounts or apps. Don't discuss specifics on the phone. She looked at him, and for a moment the composure cracked slightly. Not into fear exactly, but into the rawness underneath sustained bravery. The place where you'd been holding something hard for a long time, and someone had just told you it was real, and that it mattered, and that you needed to protect yourself. Is this really what it looks like? She asked. Yeah, he said. He didn't soften it. She'd earned the honest answer. It really is. He stood, gathered his bag, his notepad, his files, everything analog, everything that had never touched their network, and looked around the compliance office one last time. The monitors were still running. The day's work was there in the system, accessible to anyone with the right access, which by tomorrow might be everyone or no one depending on what Victor Ashford arranged before morning. He zipped his bag. He thought about the stegosaurus on the canvas. He thought about Sophie asking whether he'd had a good day and what he was going to say, because she was 7, and perceptive in the way children were before they learned to be strategic about what they noticed, and she was going to look at his face and see something. He was going to tell her it was a hard day, and he'd explain when she was older, which was the particular honest evasion of a parent who wanted to be truthful and also wanted to protect his kid from the weight of things she couldn't carry yet. He was almost to the elevator when his phone rang again. Hargrove. He answered. City IT came back on the build signatures, Hargrove said without preamble. The secondary program was written by an entity called Meridian Systems Solutions, registered contractor, mostly defense and municipal security work. They've been dissolved 16 months ago, about 2 months after the installation window. Ethan stopped walking. Who owned Meridian? A pause on the other end that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. On paper, 3 board members, but the registered agent of record and the majority financial interest holder behind 2 shell companies, Hargrove said. Victor Ashford. Ethan stood in the corridor of the 3rd floor of Titan Shield Technologies and let that sentence settle into the full weight of what it meant. Victor Ashford had commissioned the program through a company he controlled. He'd had it installed during a 14-minute camera blackout, authorized by his own man in security. He'd dissolved the company afterward. He'd placed Marcus Steele in the building to manage the cover. And he'd let his daughter run the company with her name on every document, signing certifications of compliance for infrastructure she didn't know was compromised, either because he'd kept her in the dark or because knowing and not looking was easier than asking the question. Ethan, Hargrove said, you there? I'm here, Ethan said. He is standing by. I need you to get your documentation to a secure location tonight. I know, Ethan said. I'm already moving. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the lobby. He wrote it down alone, standing in the mirrored box, looking at his own reflection. The flannel shirt, the battered bag, the face that Claire Ashford had dismissed in 12 seconds this morning before calling someone to remove him. He looked tired. He was tired. But the thing about this kind of work, the thing that had kept him doing it for 11 years in facilities that didn't want him there, in lobbies where people snapped their fingers and called him a handyman, in systems where the hiding was careful and the people doing it were smart, was that tired didn't stop you. You documented what you found, you secured the record, and you kept going. The elevator opened on the lobby. He walked through it without looking at the reception desk, pushed through the glass doors into the late afternoon, and crossed the parking lot to his 12-year-old pickup truck with the small dent in the passenger door that he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. He sat in the driver's seat and called Mrs. Paula. Can Sophie stay with you tonight? He asked. I have to work. I already fed her dinner, Mrs. Paula said. She's watching something about dinosaurs. You sound tired. I know, he said. Thank you. He hung up. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel and thought about what was coming next. The IG office, the documentation handoff, the formal investigation that Hargrove's 48-hour window was about to trigger. He thought about a hidden program with 5 functions that could lock exits and silence alarms and reach into the emergency infrastructure of 14 city buildings. He thought about what the contract signing ceremony would look like in 3 days, with hundreds of guests in this building, in a facility whose emergency systems were compromised in ways nobody except Victor Ashford and Marcus Steele fully understood. He started the truck. There was still work to do. The Inspector General's office was on the 14th floor of the Whitmore Municipal Building, and it looked exactly like a place where institutional problems came to either get solved or get buried. Drop ceilings, fluorescent lighting, the particular smell of recycled air, and too much coffee. Sandra Chu met Ethan in the corridor at 7:40 that evening, with a paper cup of something that was technically coffee, and the expression of a person who had been doing this long enough to recognize when a situation was real. She was 47, compact, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a yellow legal pad she carried the way other people carried phones, constantly, reflexively, like an extension of her hand. She'd been with the IG's office for 19 years. She had seen 3 mayors, 2 major corruption cases, and 1 infrastructure scandal that had cost the city $60 million and resulted in exactly 2 convictions. She was not easily impressed and not easily alarmed, which made the way she read through Ethan's documentation, slowly, going back twice on certain pages, more significant than if she'd visibly reacted. She set the last page down and looked at him. "The remote activation trigger," she said. "Walk me through that again." He did. He explained the external access pathway, the custom authentication layer, the architecture of a program designed to be executable without physical presence in the building. He explained what the 5 functions could do in combination, not separately, not as individual malfunctions, but as a coordinated sequence. Lock the exits, disable the fire suppression communication, block the external alerts, suspend the city emergency interface, erase the evidence archive. In that order, in a building full of people, with no one able to call for help and no record afterward of what had happened. Sandra Chu listened to all of it. She wrote 3 things on her legal pad. Then she looked at him with the flat, careful expression of someone assembling what a thing means. "What's your read on the intent?" she asked. "Best theory." "Best theory," Ethan said, "is that someone was building leverage. The program isn't designed to kill people. It's designed to create a controllable crisis. You lock the exits and kill the alerts during a high-profile event. You create panic. You demonstrate to the city that their emergency infrastructure is vulnerable. And then you offer the solution." He paused. Titan Shield's primary product line is emergency security systems. If they can demonstrate both the vulnerability and the fix, they become indispensable, Sandra said, to the city, to the contract, and to every renewal conversation for the next 20 years. She looked at her legal pad. She looked at him. "That's a significant theory." "I know," he said. "I'm not certifying it. I'm telling you what the architecture suggests." "Victor Ashford." She said the name the way lawyers said names, without inflection, just wait. "You have him in the building during the installation window. In the building during a 14-minute camera blackout authorized by his own security director. And the contracting entity, Meridian Systems Solutions, is connected to him through shell companies. The registered agent records are in the documentation. City IT pulled the build signatures." She picked up the stack of papers, tapped them even on the table, and set them in a manila folder that she sealed and initialed on the flap. "I'm opening a formal preliminary investigation effective tonight," she said. "That means I need you on limited public contact for the next 48 hours. Nothing to the press, nothing that could compromise the chain of custody." "Understood." "The contract signing is in 3 days," she said. "That's our hard deadline. I'm going to request an administrative hold through the city manager's office first thing tomorrow. Whether that holds or gets challenged by Titan Shield's legal team is another question." "If they challenge it, they'll need to do it in writing," Ethan said. "That creates its own record." A faint expression crossed Sandra's face that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "You've done this before," she said. "A few times," he said. He left the Whitmore building at 8:53 and drove home through the quiet of a city that didn't know what was sitting underneath the glass and concrete of Titan Shield Technologies. He picked up Sophie from Mrs. Paula's, carried her home half asleep with her face against his shoulder, and put her in her bed with the fan running at the wall. He stood in her doorway for a moment longer than necessary, the way parents do, not watching anything happen, just watching her exist in the uncomplicated safety of her own room. He went to bed at 11. He lay there for 40 minutes, not sleeping, going through the documentation in his head, checking for gaps. Then he slept, badly, and woke at 5:15 when Sophie climbed over him to get the better pillow. He made oatmeal again. She ate it without complaining, which told him she was still half asleep. He kissed the top of her head and drove to the Whitmore building at 7, where Sandra Chu was already at her desk with a fresh legal pad and the information that Titan Shield's legal team had filed a preliminary objection to the administrative hold at 6:42 that morning. "That was fast," Ethan said. "They had it drafted before I filed the hold request," Sandra said, "which means they were expecting this." "Victor Ashford knew we were moving last night," Ethan said. "He came to the compliance office specifically to assess how much I had. I told him I'd seen the building management logs for the 14-month window." Sandra's expression was flat but not pleased. "He had a legal ready before he left the building." "He's careful," Ethan said. "He's been careful for a long time." The objection would take at least a day to wind through the administrative process. That was the architecture of it. Not to win, but to delay. A day was enough. The signing was in 3 days, but the pre-signing demonstration event, where the city council members and department heads would see Titan Shield systems in action before the formal ceremony, was scheduled for the following afternoon. Ethan looked at the timeline and felt a tightening that was partly professional and partly something older and less rational. The feeling of a countdown clock that was moving whether or not he was ready. He spent the morning at the IG's office, working with Sandra's investigators to build the formal evidentiary record. They were thorough, and they were good. And they were also operating inside a bureaucratic structure that had its own pace, its own requirements, its own insistence on procedure, even when procedure was inconvenient. At 11:15, the city manager's legal office called Sandra and told her the administrative hold was being contested on the grounds that the inspection had not produced a formal finding of violation, only anomalies and theoretical concerns. "Theoretical concerns," Sandra repeated, looking at Ethan after she hung up. "They're not wrong on the technical point," Ethan said. "I couldn't access the diagnostic layer to fully document the program. What I have is architectural evidence and supporting documentation. It's strong, but a formal violation finding requires access you didn't get," Sandra finished. "Access I didn't get." She looked at her legal pad. She looked at the ceiling. She made the particular expression of someone doing math they don't like the answer to. "If I can't hold the signing, and you can't certify a violation, they proceed with the demonstration tomorrow, and the signing the day after." She paused. "And the program is in the system." "The program is in the system," he confirmed. A long moment of quiet. "What do you need?" she asked. "I need to be at the demonstration," he said. She looked at him. "That's a live event. City council members, department heads, press." "I know." "If you're right about the program's function and something triggers during the demonstration." "I know," he said again. "That's why I need to be there. Because if something does trigger, someone needs to know how to stop it." He met her eyes. "And because if nothing triggers, I get one more look at the live system, which might be enough to find what I couldn't access from the compliance office." She considered him for a long moment. Then she said, "I can get you in as an official city observer. That's within the IG's authority for an event that interfaces with municipal infrastructure." "Then do it," he said. She wrote on her legal pad, "I want 2 investigators on site as well. Plain clothes. They're there as guests." Agreed. He left the Whitmore building at 1 in the afternoon and drove to the IG's evidence lab, where a forensic IT specialist named Gordon Way had spent the morning analyzing the build signatures Hargrove had pulled. Gordon was 32, spoke in a fast and slightly distracted manner as though his mouth was always slightly behind his brain, and had the particular energy of someone who had found something that interested him. "Okay," Gordon said, barely waiting for Ethan to sit down. "The secondary program, and I want to be clear, this is a genuinely sophisticated piece of work. Whoever wrote this was not an amateur. It has a dormant mode and an active mode. In dormant mode, it's almost invisible. Your standard compliance scan, even a pretty good one, would read it as legacy diagnostic infrastructure. It's designed to look like something that should be there." "That's why Olivia couldn't get anyone to take her report seriously," Ethan said. The surface reading looked normal. Right. Now active mode is triggered by an external signal. I found the signal architecture in the build data. It's coded to respond to a specific frequency transmission on a channel that's not part of the building's documented network. Gordon turned his monitor toward Ethan. Here's where it gets interesting. The trigger frequency is the same frequency used by Titan Shield's own demonstration system, the one they use during live product presentations to activate and deactivate security features remotely. Ethan looked at the screen. So the same signal they used to demonstrate the system during the event could activate the program, Gordon said, depending on the transmission parameters. If someone sends the demo signal with a specific modification that looks, from the outside, like a routine demonstration command, he spread his hands. The program wakes up. The room was very quiet for a moment. Can the modification be detected in real time? Ethan asked. If someone's monitoring the signal during the demonstration? If you know what you're looking for and you have the right equipment, Gordon said. Otherwise, it looks like a normal demo command. What would I need to monitor it? Gordon looked at him for a second. You want to go into that demonstration with signal monitoring equipment. I want to go into that demonstration knowing whether someone is about to activate a program that can lock 400 people inside a building, Ethan said. Gordon thought about it. Then he turned back to his monitor. Give me the morning, he said. I'll build you something you can run on your phone. Ethan looked at him. You can do that by tomorrow morning? I can do it by tonight if you stop talking to me, Gordon said pleasantly. Ethan left him to it. He called Hargrove from the parking lot. He explained the signal architecture, the demonstration trigger, the timeline. Hargrove was quiet for a moment after he finished. Then, Ethan, if the program activates during the demonstration, I know. There are going to be 2 city council members in that building, the infrastructure director, press. I know, he said. That's not an accident. If the crisis happens in front of witnesses, the impact, and the optics of Titan Shield providing the solution, is maximized. Unless you can stop it. That's the plan, Ethan said. But I need something from you. I need someone from City IT on site who has the authority and the access to physically disconnect the building's network from the municipal emergency infrastructure, if I say so. A pause. You're asking me to station someone who can cut the city's emergency link in a room full of council members. I'm asking you to make sure that if the program activates and starts reaching through the city interface, someone can sever it before it gets to the 14 other facilities. He waited. The alternative is hoping it doesn't activate, which means hoping that a man who dissolved his contractor company after the installation and had his legal team ready before 6 a.m. is feeling merciful. Another pause, longer. I'll have someone there, Hargrove said. But Ethan, you better be right about this. I know, he said. He drove home that evening, made dinner that was mostly edible, and sat at the kitchen table while Sophie did her homework across from him. A worksheet about animal habitats that she was completing with the focused intensity she brought to anything that involved animals. He looked at his notes. He looked at her. He thought about the demonstration tomorrow, the 400 people, the signal that looked like a routine command. Dad, Sophie said without looking up. Yeah. Are you doing your worrying thing? He looked at her. What worrying thing? You get this face. She demonstrated, apparently, a subtle pulling in around the eyes, a particular set to the jaw. He had no idea he made that face. It's your working on a problem face, but more stressed. I'm fine, he said. She looked at him with the clear, assessing gaze of a 7-year-old who had spent her whole life reading the one person available to her. Okay, she said, in the tone that meant she didn't believe him but was choosing to let it go. She went back to her worksheet. You should eat your dinner. It's getting cold. He ate his dinner. He went to bed at 10, and this time he slept, which surprised him. He was up at 5:30 without an alarm, showered, made coffee, wrote 3 pages of notes in longhand that organized everything he knew into a sequence he could act on. Gordon texted at 6:45. App is built. Come get it before 8. He was at the evidence lab at 7:15. Gordon walked him through the monitoring app in 20 minutes. A stripped-down signal scanner running on a frequency range that covered the hidden program's trigger channel, disguised in the app drawer as a weather application. If the modified signal was transmitted, it would vibrate twice and show a yellow alert. If the full activation sequence was sent, it would vibrate continuously and show red. What's the range? Ethan asked. Within about 30 feet of the transmission source. If you're in the room where someone sends the signal, you'll catch it. And if I catch it? Gordon looked at him steadily. Then you have to move very fast. He drove to Titan Shield Technologies at 8:50. The demonstration was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. The building was already in preparation mode. He could see it from the parking lot, the additional security personnel at the entrance, a catering truck unloading at the side, the clean geometry of an event being staged. Everything polished, everything arranged, the glass facade catching the morning sun the way it was designed to. He sat in his truck for a moment. He had his bag, the battered canvas one with the stegosaurus, which held his documentation, his phone with Gordon's app, and the handwritten notes that constituted his personal record of everything the last 2 days had contained. He had Sandra's official City Observer credential in the inner pocket. He had Hargrove's word that there would be someone from City IT in the building with network severance authority. He had a plan that depended on a lot of things going the way he thought they would, and a clear awareness that things did not always go the way you thought they would. He got out of the truck. He signed in at the security desk with his observer credential. The young man at the desk was professional and efficient and gave no indication that he knew anything about the last 48 hours. Ethan was issued a visitor lanyard, blue, different from the company color coding, and directed to the main demonstration hall on the second floor. The hall was large and had been reconfigured for the event. Rows of seating facing a presentation stage, screens on either side showing a looping graphic of Titan Shield's logo, a technical demonstration area at the far end with equipment stations, and a central control panel. There were already people present, city staff setting up, 2 press photographers moving through the space, a catering team arranging a side table. The early guests would arrive at 1:30. Ethan walked the room. He did it slowly, the way he always walked a new space, reading the exits, the load points, the camera positions, the ventilation, the emergency panel location. There were 4 exits, the main entrance through which guests would enter, 2 side fire exits, and a rear access door through the technical demonstration area. He found the emergency panel on the east wall, behind a slim metal cover. He located the main network junction box in the back corridor, accessible through a door that was currently unlocked and would not stay that way once the event was running. He found Sandra's 2 plainclothes investigators already in the room, sitting separately, looking at their phones with the complete ease of people who had never worked a day of undercover observation in their lives, except they had, for years. He made brief eye contact with neither. He found the city IT contact, a woman named Reyes, middle-aged, carrying a laptop bag, standing near the technical demonstration area, and introduced himself quietly. She confirmed she had the access credentials to sever the municipal emergency interface and knew where the junction was. She looked slightly tense in the way of someone who had been briefed on a scenario they were hoping not to have to execute. "You'll know when?" she asked him quietly. "You'll know when I do," he said. "Stay close to the junction access." At 12:40, Marcus Steele arrived in the hall with 2 members of his security team. He scanned the room the way security directors scan rooms, systematically, professionally, and his eyes landed on Ethan within approximately 4 seconds. He held Ethan's gaze for a moment. He did not look surprised. He would have been notified of the observer credential. He would have known Ethan was coming. He walked over. "Inspector Mercer," he said, "I didn't expect to see you today." "City Observer status," Ethan said. "Sandra Chu's office." "I know." A pause. "I hope you understand that the system you've been concerned about will be fully demonstrated today, in front of the city council and department heads." His voice was pleasant. It was the most dangerous kind of pleasantness, the kind that knows something you don't. "I think you'll find everything performs exactly as documented." "I'm sure it will," Ethan said. Marcus held his gaze for another second, then moved on. At 1:30, the guests arrived. 2 city council members came in together, Alderman Petra Voss and Alderman James Calloway, both in their 60s, both with the practiced public warmth of politicians who had worked rooms like this for decades. The city infrastructure director, a man named Harold Pierce, arrived with 2 department staff, 6 department heads from emergency management, building inspection, and public safety. 14 press credentials, 30 corporate guests, vendors, partners, people in the ecosystem of the contract who had an interest in seeing it signed, representatives from the city pension fund, which held a significant infrastructure investment position. By 2 o'clock, there were approximately 380 people in the demonstration hall, and the doors to the main corridor had been pulled too, not locked, but closed, channeling the crowd toward the demonstration space and the refreshments along the side wall. Ethan was standing near the east wall, close to the emergency panel, with his phone in his left hand and Gordon's app open. Claire Ashford took the stage at 2:05. She was composed in the way she'd been in the lobby, precisely, deliberately. But there was something different in it today. A slight tightness around the jaw, eyes that moved through the room a fraction too quickly before she began. "Thank you all for being here," she said, and her voice was the voice of a CEO who had done this before. Warm at the surface, controlled underneath. "Today we're going to show you why Titan Shield Technologies is the right partner for this city's emergency infrastructure. Not just on paper, in action." She introduced the technical team. She introduced Marcus Steele, who came to the stage with a control tablet in his hand and nodded to the room with the ease of a man who was exactly where he'd planned to be. The demonstration began. The first 15 minutes were routine: fire suppression response sequences, emergency lighting activation, communication failover protocols. All of it was smooth and impressive, the kind of performance that had been rehearsed enough times to look effortless. And Ethan tracked every element against what he knew of the underlying architecture, while Gordon's app ran quietly in his left hand, showing no alerts. He watched Marcus's control tablet. The tablet was communicating with the demonstration system via the building's primary network. He could see the signal exchange on a secondary monitor in the technical area. Standard demonstration architecture. Everything documented. Everything visible. But Marcus was also, Ethan noticed, holding his personal phone in his right hand. Not using it. Not displaying it. Just holding it, which was a thing people did with their phones all the time for no particular reason, and was also a thing you would do if you intended to send a signal at a specific moment from a channel that wasn't the demonstration network. Ethan adjusted his position slightly, moving 6 feet closer to the technical area. Gordon's app was still clear. At 2:28, Claire said, "Let's move to the full integrated sequence, the demonstration of how our system responds to a compound emergency scenario." Marcus nodded. He lifted the control tablet. He entered a command. On the demonstration screens, a simulated emergency scenario began to populate. Fire alarm trigger in Sector 3. Lockdown protocol initiating. Communication cascade to emergency services. The room watched the screens. Everything was impressive. Everything was performing. Ethan was watching Marcus's right hand. At 2:31, Marcus's thumb moved on his personal phone. A single gesture. A tap. Ethan's phone vibrated twice. Yellow alert. The signal had been sent. Ethan was already moving. He crossed the technical area in 4 steps and reached the demonstration control panel. Not Marcus's tablet, but the physical control panel at the station, the hardwired one that connected directly to the building's emergency network. He pulled the emergency override panel open. It required a city safety inspector's code, which he entered from memory in 2 seconds. Marcus looked over and registered what was happening. "Hey, building network," Ethan said clearly, loudly enough for the people immediately around him to hear. "There's an unauthorized program executing in the emergency system." He looked at Reyes. "Now." She was already moving to the junction access door. Marcus took 2 steps toward Ethan. "That's enough." "Don't," said a voice behind Marcus. One of Sandra's investigators, badge out, hand extended. "Federal IG authority, step back." The demonstration screens had gone strange. The simulated scenario was still running, but the parameters were shifting, values changing in ways that weren't part of the program demonstration. Emergency exit control nodes were showing override commands. The fire suppression communication lines were registering active interference. The room was starting to notice that something was wrong. "What's happening?" Alderman Voss said, from the 3rd row, loudly enough that it carried. Around her, people were looking at phones, looking at each other, looking at the screens. "Please stay calm and stay seated," Ethan said, from the control panel. His voice was raised but even. Not a shout, not a command, the particular register of someone who needed to be believed quickly. "This is a technical issue and we are addressing it. All exits are accessible. There is no emergency in this building." He turned back to the panel. The override code had given him read access to the network, but not write access. He could see the execution sequence beginning to propagate, but he couldn't stop it from here. He needed the building's master network switch, which was in the server room on the first floor. "Where's your master network switch?" he said to a Titan Shield technician standing frozen near the station. The technician stared at him. "First floor server room. Where?" "East corridor, room 112. He pulled out his phone. "Gordon," he said when Gordon picked up on the second ring. "I need you remote. The program activated. I have read access from the control panel, but I need to interrupt the execution sequence at the network level before it completes the exit control command." "How far into the sequence?" Gordon said, already fast and focused, the distracted manner completely gone. "It just started. Less than a minute." "Okay." "The exit control command is the second function in the sequence. Fire suppression communication disable is first. You have maybe 90 seconds before exit control executes." A pause, the sound of typing. "I need you to get to the master switch, and I need you to enter an interrupt command manually. Do you have a pen?" "Always," Ethan said. Gordon read him a 12-character string. Ethan wrote it on his hand, recapped the pen, and moved. He went through the crowd at the edges of the hall. Not running, but fast. The particular gait of someone who is moving through a public space with controlled urgency. People were standing now, talking. The screens had gone to a static overlay. A low sound of concern was building in the room the way crowd sounds built. Gradually, then suddenly. He took the stairs to the first floor. He went down the east corridor. Room 112. The door was unlocked. He pushed through into the server room, cold, loud, with the hum of equipment, blue indicator lights on racks that ran the length of the room. The master network panel was at the far end. He found it in 11 seconds, located the command interface, and typed the interrupt string Gordon had given him. The system took 4 seconds to respond. 4 seconds was a long time when you were watching an execution counter you couldn't see. Then the interface returned. Execution halted. Network state. Suspended. He stood in the cold and the hum with his hand flat on the panel and let a single breath out. Then he got back on the phone. "It stopped," he said. "Yeah," Gordon said. "I see it from here. The exit control command was 78% complete. Another 20 seconds and it would have executed." A pause. "You cut it close." "I know," Ethan said. "The fire suppression disable had already completed," Gordon said, and his voice was careful. 40% of the building's fire suppression communication was offline for about 60 seconds. Ethan looked at the ceiling. "Anyone in the building right now with smoke or heat?" The suppression itself wasn't disabled, just the communication layer. The sprinklers would still have triggered on heat activation, but the alerts wouldn't have gone out. Gordon paused. It was designed to look like an emergency without being one, a demonstration of vulnerability. Ethan thought about that for a moment. About 380 people in a building with silent alerts and a program 60 seconds from locking the exits. About what that would have felt like, and who would have been positioned to explain what had happened and what they would have offered as the solution. He thought about how long Victor Ashford had been planning this. He picked up his bag and went back upstairs. The demonstration hall was a different room than it had been 8 minutes ago. The rows of seating had dissolved into clusters of people, some on phones, some talking in tight groups, some just standing with the alert, slightly frozen look of people who have understood that something went wrong and are waiting to understand how wrong. The city council members were together near the front, and the infrastructure director Pierce was with them, his face set in the particular expression of a man who is calculating institutional consequences in real time. Sandra Chu was at the front of the room. She had come in through the side entrance during the last 8 minutes, and she was standing with her legal pad and her deputy, and her presence in the room had already shifted the gravity of it, because a senior IG official at a corporate demonstration was not a thing that happened unless something had happened. Claire Ashford was standing near the stage. She was not composed in the way she had been. She was controlled, but it was a different kind of control. The tight, white-knuckled kind that comes from watching something you built reveal a foundation you didn't know was rotten. Marcus Steele was in the corner of the room with Sandra's 2 investigators on either side of him. He was not in handcuffs. Not yet. That wasn't how this worked. It wasn't a TV arrest in the middle of a corporate event. But he was not going anywhere, and the tablet and the personal phone had been placed in evidence bags. He was looking at the wall with the expression of a man who had made a calculation and was now watching the math fail in real time. Ethan crossed the room and stopped in front of Claire. She looked at him. There was a lot in her face right now. Anger, shock, something that might have been the beginning of grief. But none of it was directed at him. That was a shift from the lobby. That was the shift that happened when you started to understand the actual shape of what you'd been standing inside. It activated, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, he said. Marcus. Her voice was flat when she said his name. And your father, Ethan said. He held her gaze. I'm sorry. The evidence is substantial. She stood very still. He watched her absorb that. Not dramatically, not with visible collapse, but the way people absorb things that are too large to process quickly, which is to say with a kind of stillness that looks like composure but isn't. How long have you known? She asked. Since day before yesterday, he said. I've been working with the IG's office. My signature is on everything, she said, quietly. Not defending herself, just stating it, the way you state a fact that costs you something to say aloud. Your signature was used, he said. There's a difference. Whether you knew... I didn't, she said. Then she caught herself. I should have. I should have looked harder. She looked at the room, at the dispersing guests, at the investigators with Marcus, at the screen still showing the frozen demonstration. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted on the grounds that they came with the company. She said it with the particular flat honesty of someone who had been through the first stage of reckoning and arrived at the part where excuses felt pointless. That's on me. It's partly on you, Ethan said, not unkindly. But the program in your system, the company that built it, the chairman who commissioned it, that's a different ledger. She looked at him for a long moment. Are you going to be the one who certifies this facility as non-compliant? Yes, he said. And the contract? Can't be signed while there's an active investigation, he said. And there's going to be an active investigation. She nodded once. Something settled in her expression. Not peace, not even close to peace, but the particular resolution of a person who has stopped negotiating with reality and is beginning to stand inside it. What do I do? She asked. It was a real question which he respected. Cooperate fully with the IG's office, he said. Your legal team will tell you what you can say. But cooperation from the CEO is material. It matters. She nodded again. Then, when you walked into this lobby 2 days ago, I thought, I know what you thought, he said. A pause. I was wrong. Yes, he said, you were. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't condemnation. It was just the truth, delivered plainly, which was the only way he knew to deliver things. He turned and walked toward Sandra, who was waiting for him with her legal pad and the particular expression of a person who has many hours of work ahead of them and has made peace with that. The program's in evidence lockdown, he said. Gordon Way should be pulling the full execution log remotely right now. Everything that activated, everything that was still pending. That plus the build signatures and the financial records on Meridian systems should give you what you need for the criminal referral. We need your testimony on record, she said, today, while everything is fresh. I know, he said. I'll be there. He looked back at the room once more. 380 people who had stood in a building with silent alerts and a program 78% of the way through locking the exits, who would never know how close the afternoon had come to being something different. City council members who had come to watch a demonstration and had instead watched one in a way nobody intended. A CEO standing near a stage that still showed her company's logo, looking at the room her father had turned into something she was only beginning to understand. Marcus Steele, in the corner, looking at a wall. And somewhere in the city, Victor Ashford, who had received a phone call from someone in the last 15 minutes, because the signal had been sent, and it had not accomplished what it was built to accomplish. And he was a careful man who would already be calculating the distance between what had happened and what could be proven. He wasn't going to have as much time for that calculation as he thought. Ethan picked up his bag, Stegosaurus outward, and walked with Sandra toward the exit, past the rows of empty chairs and the frozen screens and the technical station with its cables running down to a network that was no longer in anyone's unauthorized hands. He thought about Sophie. He thought about dinosaur pajamas and the fan and 4 inches of mattress and the particular piece of being needed in a completely ordinary way by someone who didn't care what building he'd been in or what he'd stopped or what he'd been called in a corporate lobby. He thought about what he was going to say when she asked if he'd had a good day this time. Maybe he'd tell her yes. He walked out into the afternoon, and the city was still there, going about itself the way cities did. Indifferent and vast and full of people who went home to their ordinary lives, not knowing the names of the people who had spent the day making sure those lives stayed ordinary. That was the job. He had always thought that was enough. Today, driving out of the Titan Shield parking lot for the last time, he found that it still was. Victor Ashford was arrested at 6:17 in the evening in the parking garage of the Meridian Club, a private dining establishment 3 miles from Titan Shield Technologies, where he had, apparently, gone to have dinner after receiving the call that the demonstration had failed. That detail stayed with Ethan when he read the arrest report 2 days later. Not the arrest itself, but the dinner. The man had received word that a program 11 months in the making had been interrupted, that his security director was in custody, that an IG investigation was formally open, and he had gone to have dinner. Whether that was arrogance or genuine composure, or simply the behavior of a man who had spent 71 years believing that consequences were things that happened to other people, Ethan couldn't fully say. Probably all three. The most dangerous people usually were. Marcus Steele had been taken into formal custody at the demonstration site, processed through the IG's office, and transferred to the city's criminal division before 9 that evening. He had said nothing beyond confirming his name and requesting his attorney, which was the correct legal response, and also the response of a man who understood exactly how much he had exposed himself. He had built the program. He had installed it. He had sent the activation signal in a room full of city officials. The evidence chain was not going to be kind to him. Ethan gave his formal testimony to Sandra Chu's office that same evening, starting at 4:30 and finishing at 8:15. It was 3.5 hours of careful, chronological account. The lobby, the compliance office, Olivia's documentation, the building management logs, the visitor records, the signal monitoring, the server room, the interrupt command. Sandra's deputy recorded everything. Sandra wrote on her legal pad throughout, the way she always wrote, with the focused economy of someone who took notes in order to think rather than to remember. At the end, Sandra looked at her pad and said, "You entered the demonstration knowing the program might activate." "Yes," Ethan said. "And you had a plan." "I had a plan," he said. "Plans and outcomes are different things." She looked at him. "You cut it with 20 seconds to spare on the exit control command." 22, he said. Gordon timed it. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I want that on record, that you acted within your authorized scope as a city safety inspector and observer, at personal risk, to prevent potential harm to approximately 380 people. She looked at him directly. "Because that's what happened." "That's what happened," he agreed. He drove home at 8:45. Mrs. Paula had Sophie again, and when he knocked, Sophie answered the door in her pajamas with a marker stain on her chin that was either an art project or an accident, and she wasn't being specific about which. "You were gone forever," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." She looked at his face, the same look she'd given him 2 nights ago, the reading the problem face look, and apparently decided that whatever she saw there had resolved into something acceptable, because she held her arms up to be carried, and he picked her up and carried her the 20 feet back to the apartment without putting her down. "Did you have a good day?" she asked, against his shoulder. "Yeah," he said. "A hard one, but a good one." "Okay," she said. She was asleep before he finished brushing her teeth, which was a minor logistical challenge, but not an unfamiliar one. He sat at his kitchen table after she was in bed. He had a cup of tea he didn't really want, and his yellow notepad, and the particular quiet of a case that had moved from active to documentation phase. The strange deflation that came after high urgency, when the thing you had been bracing against was over, and your body hadn't quite processed that it could stop bracing. He thought about Victor Ashford in a parking garage. He thought about Marcus Steele's face in the demonstration hall corner. He thought about Olivia Carter in the compliance office saying, "I've been trying to figure out the same thing for 6 months," with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been right and unheard for a very long time. He thought about Claire Ashford standing near the stage asking, "What do I do with the flat honesty of someone who had arrived at a truth she couldn't negotiate with?" He finished the tea. He went to bed. He slept without difficulty, which sometimes happened after the long ones and sometimes didn't, and tonight it did, and he was grateful for it in the undemonstrative way he was grateful for most things. The formal investigation moved quickly by institutional standards, which meant it moved at a pace that felt slow to anyone watching from the outside, but represented, according to Sandra Chu, an unusually efficient process given the complexity of the financial structures involved. The Meridian Systems Solutions connection to Victor Ashford, the shell companies, the registered agent records, the financial interest holdings, was documented within a week. Gordon Way's forensic analysis of the hidden program's build history, combined with the execution log from the demonstration, produced a technical evidentiary package that Sandra described in their follow-up meeting as cleaner than I usually see. Clean was a relative term. The legal process was not clean. It was long and contested and full of the particular friction of high-stakes corporate litigation, where the people with resources could slow the machinery in ways that people without them could not. Victor Ashford's legal team filed 4 motions in the first 2 weeks. 3 were denied. One created a 6-day delay in the evidence transfer process that Sandra found professionally aggravating and personally instructive about the gap between justice and its timeline. Marcus Steele did not fight. That surprised some people and did not surprise Ethan. Steele was a practical man. Ethan had understood that from the lobby on the first day, from the calculated pleasantness, from the speed with which he'd assembled a corporate espionage narrative as a contingency. A practical man looks at an evidence package that includes his own authorization signature on a camera blackout, his physical presence during the installation window, his name in the diagnostic layer's code comments. Because Gordon had found that the particular vanity of a technically skilled person who hadn't fully anticipated being caught, and makes a practical calculation. He cooperated. His testimony about Victor Ashford's role, the commissioning of Meridian Systems, the design specifications provided to the external developers, the intent behind the program's functionality, all of it went into the record. Victor Ashford, in the end, did not have the distance he thought he had. He was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud against a municipal government, criminal interference with public safety infrastructure, and corporate malfeasance. The charges carried significant sentencing exposure. His legal team negotiated for 8 months before a plea agreement was reached, a process Ethan was not part of and did not follow closely because his part was finished, and he had learned early in his career that following the legal aftermath of an investigation was a way to make yourself miserable without being able to change anything. Marcus Steele's cooperation earned him a reduced charge and a sentence that, when it came down, felt to some observers like not enough. Ethan understood that feeling and also understood that what felt like not enough and what the evidence could support in court were different questions, and that the difference between them was not a failure of the system so much as an honest accounting of its limits. The system was not designed to deliver satisfaction. It was designed to produce accountability within the constraints of what could be proven. Sometimes those two things coincided. More often, they approximated. Victor Ashford received 4 years, with eligibility for supervised release after 28 months given his age and a medical condition his team had introduced into the mitigation argument. Whether that was justice in the full sense of the word was a question Ethan sat with for a while and eventually set down without resolving, because some questions weren't meant to be resolved, just carried honestly. The city contract was formally canceled in the first week of the investigation. The announcement was made by the city manager's office in language that was careful not to address the criminal case directly, citing instead a finding of material non-disclosure in the compliance certification submitted by Titan Shield. The pension fund withdrew its infrastructure position. 3 board members resigned. The company's valuation, which had been built partly on the anticipated contract, fell significantly in the weeks that followed. Claire Ashford cooperated with the investigation without reservation. That was what Sandra told Ethan in their last formal meeting when the case had moved fully into the prosecution phase and Ethan's direct involvement was complete. Claire had provided her own documentation, emails, board meeting records, communications from Victor that, read in sequence, showed a chairman who had very deliberately kept his CEO daughter at the edge of full information while placing his own infrastructure in positions she trusted. It was a particular kind of manipulation, the kind that operated through omission rather than instruction, through the careful management of what someone knew rather than what they were told to do. She didn't know, Sandra said. The digital signature on the compliance certifications was accessed through her credentials without her knowledge. We have the access logs. She paused. She should have asked harder questions about Marcus, about the compliance reports that disappeared. She had the position and the authority to demand answers she didn't demand. But that's leadership failure. It's not criminal conduct. What happens to her? Ethan asked. That's up to the board, Sandra said. And up to her. What happened to Claire was that she stayed. That surprised people too, but differently. Not in the way Marcus's cooperation surprised them, but in the way people are surprised when someone chooses difficulty over exit. She could have resigned, positioned herself as a victim of her father's manipulation, walked away from the company with her legal exposure minimal and her reputation damaged but survivable. She had the personal wealth to do it. She had lawyers who probably advised her to consider it. Instead, she went to the board, what was left of it after the resignations, and made a proposal. Independent oversight structure, external safety board with full audit authority, a complete infrastructure rebuild with documentation processes that answered to no single internal authority, full public disclosure of the investigation findings and the compliance failures, in language that didn't soften what had happened. She announced it at a press conference that Ethan heard about secondhand from Hargrove, who had attended as a city representative. She didn't read from notes, Hargrove told him on the phone that evening. She stood up there and just talked, said the company had failed in its fundamental obligation to the people it was supposed to serve. Said she had failed as a leader for not building a culture where a warning from an engineer could reach her without being suppressed. Said she was responsible for what happened in her house, whether or not she had known. A pause. She apologized, not in the corporate way, actually apologized. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How'd it land? Mixed, Hargrove said honestly. Some people thought it was too late. Some people thought it was the right thing regardless of when it came. Most people didn't know what to do with a powerful person who just stood there and said they fell short without trying to redirect it. Because it doesn't happen often, Ethan said. No, Hargrove said, it doesn't. Olivia Carter's story went differently, and in some ways better. She had stayed at her cousin's place for 4 days after the demonstration. During that time, the IG's office had confirmed her status as a protected witness under the city's whistleblower ordinance, which meant the termination Marcus had planned for her was not only reversed but became itself part of the evidentiary record. An attempted intimidation of a regulatory witness, documented, time-stamped, attached to Marcus's cooperation agreement as an additional count of obstruction. When she came back to work, she came back to a company in the middle of a reckoning. Some people in the building treated her differently, with the slightly awkward deference people extend to someone who has been through something publicly and come out right. Some people avoided her. Her direct supervisor, Derek Ewan, asked to speak with her in the first week back, and she told Ethan later that the conversation had been uncomfortable and genuine in equal measure. A man trying to account for the months in which he'd told her to stop creating problems, without being able to fully articulate why he'd said it. What did you tell him? Ethan asked. They were having coffee in a place near the Whitmore building, 6 weeks after the demonstration. Olivia had her hands wrapped around a mug that said something on it this time. A coffee shop logo, nothing meaningful. And she looked rested in a way she hadn't looked during any of the previous days he'd known her. I told him I understood how it happened, she said. And that understanding how it happened didn't mean it was okay. She shrugged slightly. He accepted that. I think it was the most honest conversation he'd had in years. How are you? He asked. A real question. She thought about it, which he appreciated. People who thought before they answered, "How are you?" were telling you something true. Tired, she said. Relieved. Weird about the whole thing, honestly. I spent 6 months feeling crazy. Like I was the only one who could see what was obvious, and everyone around me was either not looking or actively not looking. And now I know I was right, and there's a kind of, I don't know. It doesn't feel triumphant. It just feels like a lot of time and a lot of stress and an outcome that should have been avoidable. It should have been, he said. Does it usually feel like this? When you find something? He thought about that honestly. Sometimes, he said, the ones where people could have caught it earlier and didn't, those ones feel like this. You're glad you found it. You're tired from what it took, and you sit with the gap between what happened and what didn't have to happen. She nodded. What do you do with the gap? You put it down eventually, he said, or you carry it more lightly. One of those. He drank his coffee. You were good in that building, better than most people would have been. She looked at him with a slight narrowing of her expression, the look of someone deciding whether a compliment is earned or polite. I kept the documentation, she said. That's all I did. That's not all you did, he said. You kept it when there was nothing telling you it would ever matter. That's different. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Claire offered me the safety engineering directorship. He looked at her. What did you say? I said I needed to think about it. She turned the mug in her hands. I'm still thinking. What's the question? He asked. Whether I can trust the structure she's building, Olivia said. Whether independent oversight means what she says it means, or whether it's a rebranding of the same system with different paperwork. She paused. And whether I'm the right person to be inside the thing rather than outside it. You'd have more authority inside, he said. And less freedom, she said. It's a real trade-off. He nodded. He didn't push. She would make the right decision for herself. And the right decision was hers to make. And the fact that she was asking the hard questions about it, rather than just taking the offer, told him she was thinking about it correctly. She took the position, in the end. He heard about it through Hargrove 2 weeks later. Olivia Carter, appointed Director of Safety Engineering, Titan Shield Technologies, under the new Independent Oversight Board structure. The appointment was noted in the city's infrastructure press release as part of the company's remediation commitments. He thought that was the right outcome. Not clean. Nothing about the whole thing was clean, but right. And the way things could be right without being simple. Peter Lynn, the engineer who had transferred departments after Olivia showed him her documentation 3 months earlier, submitted his own statement to the IG's office during the investigation. He'd seen enough, he wrote, to know something was wrong, and he had made the decision not to act on it because the cost felt too high. He wanted the record to include that acknowledgement. He didn't ask for anything in return for making it. Not immunity, not recognition, not even a formal role in the proceedings. He just wanted it on record that he had known, and had chosen the easier path, and that he understood what that meant. Ethan read that statement once and didn't form a strong opinion about Peter Lynn. Fear was not an excuse, but it was a fact of human existence, and the distance between understanding fear and condemning the people who acted from it was something he tried to keep honest in himself. He had been afraid. In the server room, with Gordon's counter running in his head and 22 seconds on the clock. Fear was just what it was. What you did from it was the actual question. The city issued a formal commendation to Ethan 6 weeks after the case closed. A document, not a ceremony, which was the way he'd requested it when Sandra had mentioned the option. He put it in a folder in the drawer where he kept other paperwork that mattered without being decorative, and he went back to work the following Monday on a warehouse facility inspection in the south end of the city that had a ventilation anomaly. The building owner was insisting was a calibration issue. It was not a calibration issue. It took Ethan 4 hours to document why, and the building owner was unhappy about it, and the conversation at the end of the day was the kind of conversation he'd had hundreds of times. The conversation where someone with more money and more status looked at him and wanted to know who exactly he thought he was to tell them their building wasn't right. He told them the same way he always did, plainly and without performance. He was the inspector, and the building wasn't right, and he was going to put that in writing. He drove home with his bag on the passenger seat and his notes in the inner pocket and the stegosaurus facing outward, because Sophie had insisted on redrawing it last week after the original one started to fade. The new one had a small hat. He picked her up from Mrs. Paula's at 5:30. She had a permission slip for a school field trip, a drawing of a triceratops she wanted to hang on the refrigerator, and a question about whether it was true that some dinosaurs had feathers. He confirmed that it was. She said she already knew that, but wanted to check with an adult. He found that reasonable. They made dinner together. She was at the age where she wanted to help with things, but her definition of helping was occasionally creative. The eggs were slightly overdone, and the toast was exactly right, and she ate both with the focused satisfaction of someone who had participated in the production and therefore had a stake in the outcome. After dinner, she did her homework at the table while he cleaned up, and he was at the sink when she said, without looking up from her worksheet, "Dad?" "Yeah." At school, someone said their dad is a security guard, and that's almost the same as what you do. She said it with the particular tone of a child who is not sure whether this is a fact or a slight and is gathering information before deciding. "Is it?" He dried his hands on the dish towel and looked at her. "What did you say?" I said you're a safety inspector and that's different. She looked up. Is that right? That's right, he said. Security guards protect specific people or places. I look at the buildings themselves, how they're built, what the systems do, whether the people inside are safe if something goes wrong. She considered this with the gravity she brought to things she was genuinely thinking about. Do you always find out if something's wrong? Not always, he said, but I try to look carefully enough that I don't miss things. She looked back at her worksheet. That's good, she said, with the casual authority of a 7-year-old who has rendered a final verdict. People should look carefully. He folded the dish towel and put it on the counter and looked at her bent head, the tangled hair, the focused intensity of the worksheet problem she was working on. He thought about 380 people in a demonstration hall. He thought about Olivia's handwritten paper with 5 functions on it. He thought about Victor Ashford at dinner in a parking garage, calculating distance, finding none. He thought about what his daughter had just said, in the offhand and certain tone of someone who had not yet learned to complicate the obvious. People should look carefully. That was it, really. That was the whole of the work, stripped down to what it actually was. Not heroism, not procedure, not credentials or commendations, or the salute of a police commissioner in a corporate lobby. Just the willingness to look carefully when looking carefully was inconvenient, when the people around you had decided looking was unnecessary, when the systems in place were designed to make not looking the path of least resistance. Most safety failures were not acts of malice. Most of them were the accumulated weight of people who had decided that the problem was probably someone else's to find, that the anomaly was probably nothing, that the paperwork was probably fine, that the person raising the concern was probably wrong. Victor Ashford and Marcus Steele were at the extreme end, deliberate, calculated, criminal in their intent. But they had counted on a middle layer of ordinary inattention to make their program invisible. They had counted on Derek Ewan telling Olivia to stop creating problems. They had counted on Peter Lynn transferring departments. They had counted on Claire not asking the questions that would have found the things she didn't know to look for. And they had almost been right. What they hadn't counted on was a woman who kept handwritten copies of her reports because she'd learned not to trust the digital record. What they hadn't counted on was a 7-year-old's father driving an old truck to an inspection in a flannel shirt, carrying a notepad and the particular stubbornness of someone who had learned that the thing hiding in plain sight was usually hiding because everyone had decided someone else would find it. The work wasn't glamorous. It was slow and technical, and frequently unwelcome and occasionally dangerous in ways that didn't announce themselves until you were already in the middle of them. It paid reasonably, not extravagantly. It did not confer the kind of authority that made people in lobbies step aside without being shown credentials. But it was real. The problems were real. The people in the buildings were real. The difference between a system that worked and a system that looked like it worked, that gap was real. And it was the gap that Ethan Mercer had spent 11 years learning to find and say clearly what he found, without being moved by who wanted him to say something different. Sophie finished her homework and closed the worksheet folder with the decisive energy of a person who considers the matter settled. She looked at him across the kitchen. "Can we watch something?" "Sure," he said. "What do you want to watch?" "Something with animals," she said. "Not scary ones." "Okay," he said. "I think we can find that." She got up from the table and took his hand, the small, warm, matter-of-fact grip of a child who hasn't yet thought to consider whether hand-holding is something to be self-conscious about, and pulled him toward the couch with the cheerful authority she brought to most things, and he let himself be pulled. Outside, the city went on. Buildings stood and systems ran, and people moved through their days, trusting, reasonably, that the infrastructure around them was what it was supposed to be. That trust was not automatic. It was the product of a lot of unglamorous work done by people who showed up in lobbies where they weren't wanted and read schematics for hours and kept handwritten notes and didn't let the comfortable explanation replace the correct one. It wasn't enough to assume things were safe. Someone had to look. Someone had to be willing to say, clearly and without apology, what they found. And then someone had to go home and make slightly overdone eggs and sit on a couch with a 7-year-old who wanted to watch something with animals, and let that be enough. Let the ordinary goodness of an ordinary evening be the thing that made the hard days worth their cost. Ethan Mercer sat down on the couch. Sophie curled against his side with the fan remote in one hand and her Stegosaurus drawing in the other, already narrating something about the animal documentary she was selecting with the particular confidence of a person who considers herself the foremost expert in the room. He put his arm around her and let the day go. Outside, the city was safe tonight, not because the people in charge of it had kept it safe, but because someone had looked carefully when it mattered and had not stopped looking until the truth of what he found was on record and in the right hands and impossible to make disappear. That was enough. It had always been enough.